Hello everyone, this is your favorite Neko Bringonthechaos Glizzy for another What If? What if Ainz was reincarnated in the Naruto universe? Before we start, can you like and subscribe for more What If? If you wanted to request a new series and if you wanted this fanfic to a full series, please comment 3 hearts and say the fanfic that you wanted. The requirement is 1k views. If there's 1k views, I will make a second episode. And yeah, and better check out Boyzilla because he really had good stuff. For example, crossovers between Fate and Overlord. If you wanted me to make another fan fiction about Fate, but a crossover about Overlord, make sure to remind me. Yeah, if you wanted to. But make sure to check out Boyzilla because he had really good stuff. Yeah, a lot of. I really recommended that. Create the author or creator. I don't really know. Okay, without further ado, let's just get started.
The Overlord of Nadeshiko. Nadeshiko. Chapter 4. Suzuki Satoru had discovered a variety of things since arriving in this ninja-dominated world. Like, for instance, his racial nature as an undead removed the physical necessity of food and sleep but did not remove the desire for rest at a mental capacity. So, that night, when provided a temporary room until the moment he would join Shizuka after marriage, he decided to spend a majority of the time reading through novels and scrolls. It was quite a refreshing affair to read such interesting material without being bothered by anyone. After the meeting with the Elder Council, Ainz had been put to work immediately. More accurately, he spent a large portion of the evening and night hours learning about the inner workings and paperwork from Shizuka and her attendant, Tokiwa. He can confidently say that he could now take Shizuka's office position for a few hours, provided an assistant aided him, while the village leader dealt with issues requiring personal presence. It seemed that as an undead, he could handle larger workloads before mental exhaustion crept in, an advantage he'd wish he had back on Earth. But since he couldn't sleep, Ainz took advantage of his body's attributes and delved into Nadeshiko Village's library. He had walked to the third hilltop, which at this point he began referring to it as the Academy Hill, for easy reference, that had the library and withdrew any noteworthy educational books and later a bingo book copy from Shizuka's office when returning to the newly titled Main Hill, that marked the tallest hilltop. He had roughly 6 to 7 hours before the vast majority of the village awoke, a little less for the Kunoichi, who'll likely awake earlier due to their military conditioning. Ignoring those on night duty, that's a few hours without any interruptions, a perfect moment to catch up on knowledge that might be commonplace in this world. To understand the bingo book's list of rogue ninja, Ainz first needed to understand what ninja were. In YGGDRASIL, ninja was a job class that allowed a thief-type player access to much more ninjutsu, allowing a player to take aspects not dissimilar to a magic caster. While there were job classes leading up to ninja, that provided a few ninjutsu, that particular job class allowed for more focus on them. Furthermore, ninja was also quite adept at countering stealth specializing characters. Satir magic such as invisibility and perfect unknowable was counterproductive when facing them. However, Shizuka and by proxy those rogue ninja didn't identify him prior to dispelling perfect unknowable, but that could be reasoned with the fact they were low level compared to him. It might be possible that stronger ninja wouldn't be fooled by it. Shizuka might be the strongest Kunoichi of Nadeshiko, but the village wasn't considered significant compared to the Great Five. And perhaps, even compared to other ninja villages outside of that group, as there did not seem to be too large a gender ratio inequality. He had learned from a population census paper that the ratio from male to female was roughly 40 to 60%. Which could indicate that there wasn't an issue in finding men capable of fulfilling the cultural law. So, by Ainz's assumption, Nadeshiko village might be considered average among ninja villages, not of the Great Five. So not a fantastic starting area for him to arrive in, but not bad either. If it came to the circumstance that he needed to decide whether to send Kunoichi teams to areas of conflict, he can estimate its danger potential based on which ninja villages potential combatants were from, and likely avoid sending them if ninja from the 5 great ninja nations were present. Of course, if it was a direct request from the village hidden in the mist, the diplomatic and economical ties between it and Nadeshiko would have to be taken into consideration. Those missions would have to be a high priority, so Jonin would be sent, or perhaps even Shizuka or Ainz himself. But the number of Jonin-ranked individuals in Nadeshiko village was a fraction of its total Kunoichi forces. To send out of a team of wholly Jonin-ranked individuals would add to a risk factor, as Nadeshiko village would be missing some of its stronger forces in an event of invasion. Thankfully, Ainz can substitute Kunoichi with YGGDRASIL summons if it came down to it. He had both several items and spells to do so, although he figured necromancy would stain his reputation significantly if displayed, which was a critical factor because his character build revolved around undead summons. In an extreme event that it required Ainz to be sent out, he would likely be paired with Chunin or Jonin Kunoichi. This was another reason why he needed to study on the ninja, especially Nadeshiko's own Kunoichi, so their cohesion as a party in that event wouldn't fall apart. So, he read. There were many confirmations of facts he had gained throughout the prior day, but there was new information as well. Instead of mana, ninja used a source of energy known as chakra, which unfortunately Ainz didn't grab a book detailing chakra specifically, but taking into account its function as a fuel source, it behaved like mana similar enough. He did, however, take written material explaining jutsu. To use chakra to fuel and perform jutsu, the correlating hand seals had to be performed, which explained the hand motions made from the brief battle yesterday. There were 3 basic jutsu groups, ninjutsu, genjutsu, and taijutsu, with subcategories mentioned but not listed, and were also divided into 5 basic elements: fire, wind, water, earth, and lightning. Out of the 3 jutsu groups mentioned, genjutsu was considered the least problematic in Satoru's personal opinion. It targeted the opponent's biological senses and mined through their chakra flow, which Ainz did not have chakra. However, in the possibility that it could, Ainz Uul-Gaon had 2 particular racial skills working in his favor: mind-altering immunity and biological penalties resistance. The names described their effects easily enough. Ninjutsu and taijutsu were more concerning, which Ainz believed he saw both yesterday in Shizuka's fight. A jutsu has ranks similar to missions but started at E rank instead of D. If he compared them with tier magic, the strongest rank, S, might be similar to a 10th tier spell, but that was a pure assumption. He didn't know the ranks of the jutsu used yesterday, but they seemed about equal to 3rd tier. That wasn't including the possibility that they might be able to use a version of metamagic. Would an increase of chakra used in a jutsu augment its strength or effects? He could ask Shizuka about it. She'd been willing to answer his questions, even if a few of them seemed a little odd from a native perspective. Still, With the information provided in these books concerning basic knowledge on a ninja's capabilities, he had a slight understanding of what he was working with. He could now assign kunoichi specializing in one of the 3 jutsu groups to particular missions and create teams that served a jack-of-all-trades purpose. Of course, it wouldn't be so simple as to create teams. As mentioned before, Jonin only made a fraction of the kunoichi forces available. The majority were either chunin or genin unless Ainz counted academy students as military, which he didn't. Yamaiko would have his head for that, and other guild members would certainly be disappointed in him. Unfortunately, child soldiers were commonplace in Nadeshiko village, and likely the ninja world as a whole. Nearly all genin were under the age of 18, and a number of chunin as well. There wasn't anything Ainz could do about that without risking a significant loss of military power. If he had Nazarik's treasury, he could outfit Nadeshiko village with YGGDRASIL equipment, but that wasn't the case. Although he did have a few data crystals in his inventory, it wasn't enough to create equipment, not to mention he didn't have any crafting job classes to craft any items, and creating items with create greater item had no long-term sustainability, neither could he create enchanted equipment with the spell. But Suzuki Satoru was a notorious collector, so much that he spent large sums in expanding his number of inventory slots. Although he couldn't create or enchant magical items, Ainz did have several crafting reagents on hand, including a significant quantity of low-level materials. It might be possible for Nadeshiko village to use it to create equipment for kunoichi. Although he didn't know what other materials existed in this world, he had examined some equipment with appraisal magic item that Shizuka had. However, nothing the village leader had was special in any way and was made of material that new players would wear. Her throwing weapons were made of basic steel, which was immensely disappointing. But there was also to take into consideration that introducing material from YGGDRASIL would paint a huge target on Nadeshiko village and Ainz. Not to mention, although he had a large quantity of it, there wasn't any renewable source. It would be bad if it became a economical reliability in the same way oil reserves had been before their depletion on Earth. No, if he introduced those materials, it had to be in secret. In the meantime, perhaps he should create a mission to survey the surrounding area's natural resources. As for the bingo book, well, admittedly, many individuals in it looked very tunabu. There were descriptions of their abilities, but the information seemed to have been left out or was unknown. Of course, this makes sense. Knowledge was power, and keeping that secret benefited the individual and their origin village. The bingo book was also outdated. Expectedly, communication between villages wasn't instantaneously like cities on Earth. Any new information wouldn't be easily distributed until days or weeks later. Not to mention, this was the bingo book derived from the Mist Village. Its listed ninja would be different than those from the village hidden in the leaves. Again, like missions, each rogue ninja was ranked from D to S in terms of bounty and consequently, the danger level and importance. Suzuki Satoru had flipped through it and made mental note of rogue ninja a rank and above as potential dangers to himself. He considered that since they were the highest 2 ranks, they had the great potential to harm a level 100 player. That's not to say that rank meant overall power scale, it was just a precautionary measure. He also had a bit more info on bloodline limits, genetic abilities that granted peculiar abilities outside the norm of typical jutsu. Ainz reasoned that he might be able to get away with explaining his undead nature as a bloodline limit, but nothing in the bingo book indicated such an ability that it changed their appearance into heteromorphs. Also, A genetic ability that prevented the propagation of its holder would likely seem too far-fetched. Genetics doesn't work like that, he thinks. Satoru had never really delved into those subjects beyond basic understanding. Ainz placed down the bingo book satisfied with it and decided to pick up some more economically related topics and self-study books. He might as well refresh his education, just in case. Curiously enough, those assassin Kunoichi never came. Perhaps he had gotten on the good side of the Elder Council. Well, a missed opportunity to witness the Kunoichi in action, but he would get another chance in the future. The following morning, Ainz Gaon had narrowly escaped breakfast. It had been a close victory, but thankfully the excuse of eating it in his room without witnesses proved to succeed. Ainz realized that he might need to find a suitable excuse for his undead nature sooner than later, as there would only be so many times he could avoid the problems from hiding his identity. But for now, Ainz sat in the chair of Shizuka's office, already doing the village leader's job. Not a day later, and Shizuka already placed him on this chair while she went off into the village. He really should have expected this. A Chunin Kunoichi was readily available to help him, serving to move paperwork and do occasional arithmetic while Ainz navigated through the increasing work. Contrary to Ainz's prior assumption, the village leader did not actually assign each and every mission to a team. It would take too much time. As such, there was a particular building in the main hill where Kunoichi went to select which commission they wanted to take. Not dissimilar to a company allowing its employees to pick which job they wanted, this method cleared up free time for the village leader. The only exception would be A and S-ranked missions, which required the leader to acknowledge the Kunoichi team willing to take it, or personally assign a team. But Ainz did assume correctly that such high-ranking missions were rare, usually directed to the village hidden in the mist per contractual obligation. Any which were not either directly concerned Nadeshiko village or were sent by the Mist village for Nadeshiko village to handle specifically. Either way, that meant the bulk of payment came from C and B ranked missions. He managed to secure financial data related to Nadeshiko village. It wasn't a pretty picture. Frankly, there wasn't much self-sufficiently, if barely at all. Nadeshiko village relied heavily on mission payments, had little in the way of exports, and didn't have any food production capacity. Its major export was wood, which according to the assistant when asked, couldn't compete with the bordering land of Fire's wood exports, which made for ill profits for Nadeshiko. They did also export granite, due to the surrounding mountains of the valley, which did turn more of a profit for Nadeshiko village, but they lacked the infrastructure and capable Kunoichi to export it in large enough quantities. Apparently, Kunoichi with earth element ninjutsu was rare in Nadeshiko, Tokiwa being one of them. The village had a weighted favor of wind element, which its village techniques had adapted with. While a ninja could learn any basic elemental nature jutsu, apparently it was more chakra intensive to use jutsu not fitting an individual's nature, and Nadeshiko didn't have anyone with large reserves. He'd need to read deeper on chakra and its natures later. Still, although Nadeshiko village didn't have much in its treasury, it had enough for some wiggle room. Which meant he can create a few missions. Where's the empty mission forms? Ainz questioned the Chunin Kunoichi assisting him. Third drawer down on your left, Lord Ainz, she answered him, looking up briefly from her position on the floor at the room's corner, surrounded by towers of papers she'd been organizing for a while. He pulled out the drawer and grabbed a blank mission slip, then grabbed a pen instead of the writing brush. He had a bit of difficulty with the brush and only used it when he had to. Luckily, Shizuka had the foresight to have some pens on her desk. Suzuki Satoru was extremely thankful for that. Can you bring that map over? He pointed towards the localized map, not the world one. It detailed the area of the peninsula. The Chunin stood up and took it off the wall, then brought it towards the desk. Ainz cleared some paper stacks away, making room for it to unfurl completely. This is the local area, the Chunin began, pointing her finger at the map. The border between the land of fire and water is here, as you can see. We do not have jurisdiction of these villages, then proceeded to point at many others, particularly areas with potential ports. Are any of these ninja villages? Ainz questioned. No, Lord Ainz. We're the only ninja village in the peninsula, she answered. Ainz examined the map in detail. He noticed there were areas without any name, just geographical landmarks, lacking any sort of civilization. There were a few locations in the peninsula that wasn't too far. There's a lake here, he commented, noting that it was inland. It was also the tip of the peninsula. The border is quite mountainous as well. There were several areas that might be worth it. He'll send some teams to investigate and conduct geological and natural resource surveys. He began writing down the information and what was required. Since it could be considered a direct request from the co-leader of Nadeshiko, he would have to personally meet with the Kunoichi team that decided to take it. It shouldn't be a difficult mission, but taking into consideration bandits, rogue ninja, and importance for Nadeshiko's future economics, he decided to play it safe, even if it was a bit more costly. He labeled it a B rank mission with a stamp. An anxious feeling didn't fade away from his mind. Should he also give them something? A consumable of some sort. He didn't feel like giving away anything too important from his collection, call it a bit of a possessive feeling. He didn't have any crafting job classes to replace even the lowest of consumable items. That didn't mean he wouldn't use them though. I need you to test something for me, he said, reaching into his robes and pulled out an item. It looked like a small paper scroll, similar yet different in design to the ninja scrolls he'd seen so far. I want you to try and use this. Just toss it into the air and say the words lesser dexterity. The Chunin looked at him with a confused expression but did what was ordered. She took the scroll and tossed it into the air. It unfurled as she spoke, lesser dexterity. In an instant, the scroll vanished into motes of light that quickly dissipated and followed with a brief glow that emanated from her body. Her expression became one of surprise and awe. Score. He was initially doubtful. While scrolls did not require the user to know the spell or consume mana for its activation, they did require a class capable of learning its category of magic. Ainz was aware that ninja job class could use many scrolls, and it seems to be the case the rules classified chakra ninjas as close enough. Sir, I feel stronger, but in a certain way. She was confused. What did that do? It's a special consumable item, Ainz explained. Stores a jutsu that can be activated later with no cost. You are now affected by a buff enhancement that increased your dexterity for an hour. He twisted the actual explanation to match this world's use. Now take this filled mission form and bring it to where they're presented. Lord Ainz, can I also take some time to try this enhancement out? She said, taking the paper from him. Sure, report to me in an hour when it wears off, he said, approving the trial period. The Chunin looked excited and quickly bowed before departing with haste to fulfill the job and test out her newly bestowed enhancement. Ainz nodded to his success. Glad that it worked, but I won't have enough scrolls to last forever. especially for such a large number of Kunoiki. Not to mention, there were some scrolls that he doubted they would be able to use. There was a level requirement for some scrolls. He had some, perfect unknowable, but doubted his assistant Chunin would be able to use them. Now, while he waited, he might as well get through more of this paperwork. But, not an hour later, someone knocked on his door asking to enter. It wouldn't be Shizuka, as she was busy elsewhere, and the voice didn't sound like any of the elders. "Enter," he allowed. 3 Kunoiki that entered, 2 of them looked younger than 18, the oldest somewhere in her late 20s. He figured the eldest was a Jonin, while the 2 teenagers were Chunin, given they all wore vests of Nadeshiko instead of freestyle clothing. "Greetings, I am Ainz Gaon, co-leader of Nadeshiko, can you introduce yourselves?" he said. "Nina." "I'm a Chunin, Lord Ainz," a young girl answered with high positive energy, a big grin on her face, brown hair tied in twin tails with red ribbons. Her grey uniform had some marks of green color to it, likely some personal adjustments for aesthetic reasons, and her village headband was wrapped around her head. Chuninaki, Lord Ainz, in contrast, this teenager was soft-spoken, her black hair reached down to only her shoulders, but had frontal bangs that nearly hid her eyes. Her uniform had no additional aesthetic adjustments save for a fake purple flower sewn into the right breast and her headband tied to her left upper arm instead of her head. The oldest spoke, "I am Jonin Kluke, Lord Ainz." Straight to the point, professional, and having no personal changes to the Nadeshiko uniform. She looked almost average, brown hair tied in a high ponytail, fair skin, excellent build, but had a single unique feature of green eyes. "We've come in response to the B-ranked mission you recently posted." "Excellent." Ainz was impressed at the speed it was responded with. "I need you to conduct a geological survey at this location," he pointed to the area in question. "From what I know, there is a large lake in the center of it. I want to know the area's natural resources and anything of interest. It's of economic importance that Nadeshiko village finds additional means of income, and I'm hoping this region has what I seek." "Seems simple for a B rank," Kluke commented. "You can say I'm playing cautiously here," Ainz admitted. "Furthermore, I'm also giving you experimental scrolls that I want you to use in emergencies." He brought out 3 scrolls. These scrolls, in particular, have a type of genjutsu called invisibility stored within. It makes you visibly undetectable for 30 minutes, but to keep audibly quiet during its effects, people can still hear you. He pushed them forward as the Jonin collected and stored them into her weapon pouch. "How do we use them?" Kluke questioned. "A simple toss into the air and speaking the jutsu name, no chakra required," Ainz explained. "It will be consumed on use," he further clarified. "Neat. We'll get it done in no time," Nina said excitedly. "We'll return as soon as we can," Aki said. He nodded and waved them dismissively, "Good luck." And they departed from the office shortly thereafter. Ainz Gaon eagerly awaited their return. It was the first mission he ever assigned, and it should be a simple one. It was just a survey of a lake, after all. The Overlord of Nadeshiko. Chapter 5. Blue Planet, you would have enjoyed this view, Suzuki Satoru spoke to himself, finding a brief respite from work to see the fantastical view on top of a tower. His gaze followed the shifting landscape, watching as the forest turned into woodlands before becoming increasingly sparse the closer the mountains of the valley rose. He could see a gleaming blue river running through it, flowing down the valley and away from his sight, a few people collecting its vibrant waters. It was a beautiful sight, and the refreshing breeze provided a relaxing scent and comfort. He reached into his inventory and pulled out a peculiar object, a seed. It lay in the palm of his glove, moved slightly by the wind but never away. "A little seed from Nazarick," he commented, remembering the various seeds that he and other guild members collected to aid in Blue Planet's collection, wanting to further decorate the Great Tom's 6th floor with various plants. He was a randomized seed too, its species unidentifiable until a certain growth period. However, out of everything in his inventory, he only had a single seed. They cluttered his inventory beforehand, so he'd stored them away in Nazarick's treasure. But he felt sentimental and kept a single seed item for personal reasons. He clutched the seed in his hand and briefly glanced around to spot anyone watching. Ainz nodded. "Greater teleportation." He spoke the tear spell and vanished from Nadeshiko village, reappearing much farther away next to the river he spotted. Suzuki Satoru took a moment to bask in nature, then walked to a suitable spot. "Blue Planet, you always said that you wanted to plant seeds. Well, I'll fulfill your wish to some degree here." He crouched down and began digging out a suitable hole, deep enough to avoid birds and other animals he would work. The Overlord planted the seed and buried it, just in case. He wanted something to protect it but didn't want to use undead or anything high level. This would give him a chance to experiment with some summons. A black void briefly appeared as the player reached into his inventory and pulled forth the staff of Ainz Gown. Then, with a small gesture, used one of its 7 gems of the serpent mouths, Gem of the Moon, to summon with a thought 3 Moonlight Wolves. They were each level 20, highly agile ambush monsters that had the appearance of Siberian wolves with a radiated silver glow. Since they were so low level, Ainz could kill them easily in a single spell, and an individual like Shizuka could kill them without too much difficulty. Since this area had relatively close proximity to Nadeshiko village, he didn't want incidents to occur leading to citizen or Konoiki deaths. But they should be enough to dissuade people from approaching. Ainz could feel a mysterious connection between him and the summons, a subservient link that clearly identified the master and servant relationship. "Guard this location and this planted seed. Do not kill humans, but you can injure them if they attempt to approach," he ordered. The wolves barked in response. Satisfied, Ainz stored the staff of Ainz Gown back into his inventory. He didn't know if summons would remain indefinitely unless he dispelled them with the staff, so he would return to check every few days. Although he planted the seed out of response to Blue Planet, he also served as a possible test to see if something from YGGDRASIL could grow here. While the Moonlight Wolves served to test how summons worked in this ninja world. Now, speaking of ninja, he was curious about Nadeshiko's medical nin. Since it wasn't based on tier magic, using ninjutsu relying on chakra, he wondered as to the potency of healing jutsu in relation to healing spells. He used the 7th tier spell, Greater Teleportation, to return to his room in Nadeshiko village. He waited a bit in the room, making sure there was nobody around to have seen his spell, but it seems none were the wiser. Ainz still had a bit of time before he had to visit Shizuka back in the CEO office, or the village leader's office it was known by. It was basically his lunch break right now, a refreshing half-hour off work. Suzuki Satoru never had more than 10 minutes in his old company, and that was generous compared to other workplaces. Ainz walked out of his room and through the hallway leading out of the building. If he recalled the tour, Nadeshiko's hospital building is located on Academy Hill, where other public services also were. Yet another example of either poor planning or purposeful bias, as it was the farthest from the residential hill, the lowest of the hills containing the majority of the population, all who were newer generations only going a few back. The downside of creating a civilization on top of hills was that there was limited space, so urban planners should take into consideration the placement of public services. But again, it was poor city planning that Nadeshiko village suffered from, even if it wasn't clearly apparent with the residents. Could I expand the size of the hills with tear magic? Ainz muttered under his breath to himself. He had a massive collection of spells, more so than anyone in his guild, but unfortunately, he didn't have any nature-based spells. That would fall under the druid class and similar builds. He did, however, have a single certain spell that could change the environment entirely. But using that would be like announcing his identity as a player. He needed to keep such trump cards hidden. No dice then, he said. Wait, jutsu of the earth element was possible, then wouldn't I just need to have multiple Kunoichi cast them? But did ninjutsu changes in terrain last permanently? Well, it is used for the quarry, maybe I should confirm with Tokiwa about it. An expansion might be possible, but the labor costs would be substantial. And as Ainz knew, Nadeshiko village had little spare cash to spend, unless they accepted credit. It would put Nadeshiko village in debt, but that wasn't anything new for governments. If so, demolition and reconstruction of facilities for efficient city design are not far out of reach either. It would displace some citizens for a time, but temporary housing can be arranged on the ground until construction is complete. If the geological survey or subsequent ones succeed, it would hopefully provide some financial relief. He stopped, having lost his way after leaving the main hall's building. Although the tour did help him, Ainz was still unfamiliar with the city layout. He glanced around, eyes trailing over busy citizens, and spotted a young girl that, although dressed in personal clothing of a basic shirt and skirt with bright green colors, did wear a headband that marked her status as a Kunoichi. Perhaps a genin, she appeared about 12 with long brunette hair and was looking at him with a curious gaze. Ainz approached her. Greetings, can you tell me which direction is the bridge to the academy? She seemed a bit hesitant. Did he intimidate her accidentally? Are you Lord Ainz? Lady Shizuka's husband? Not a husband yet, the ceremony hasn't begun, but I am Ainz Uilgaon, he answered her. I'm Sakiko. Your name sounds cool, I think it matches your amazing outfit, almost like something out of a book, she complimented. Red adorned her cheeks with it as she observed his equipment. He chuckled a bit, feeling a little joy from her honesty. Thank you, my friends helped in its design, he replied, thinking a bit back on the days Ainz Uilgaon's members helped each other collect or craft equipment in YGGDRASIL. Really? Your friends must be professionals. She spoke with awe. Ha ha ha. He laughed. Yes. They were quite the professionals in their fields. He boasted proudly of the fact. His increased joy was suppressed back. Ainz's laughter died down quickly. TCH, so it affects the two. He whispered to himself, displeased with the interruption. I was wondering if you had something cool like that I could have. The genin asked. Ainz thought about it for a bit, but appreciating the genin's honesty and praise, he decided to relent. A low-level item shouldn't be any trouble. Depends, what kind of Kunoichi are you training to be? He asked. Since Sakiko was a genin, the girl likely lacked a specialization. Similar to how new players' builds lacked focus on what classes they wanted until they learned more of the game. I'm training to be a medical nin, but I like learning ninjutsu too, she answered him. Oh, what luck, a medical nin in training, just what he was looking for. Well, that's fortunate, I was curious as to how medical jutsu worked. If you can satisfy my curiosity, I'll give you a special item that'll help in healing. Rewarding employees for good work made a decent boss. And although Sakiko was a child, she was also a Kunoichi of Nadeshiko Village's military forces, which meant she was by definition under him. Really? What do you want to know then, Lord Ainz? Sakiko asked excitedly. How many medical nin are there in Nadeshiko? He questioned. We only have a dozen, it's hard to train as a medical nin, most people at the hospital are just doctors, not capable of medical ninjutsu, she answered truthfully. So whatever subcategory of job class that allowed the designation of medical nin was difficult to acquire. Or was it related to the jutsu that made it difficult? Any reasons why? He continued. Yeah, it requires a lot of precise chakra control, all the jutsu rely on it, Sakiko said, then pointed to herself and boasted proudly. I happen to be really gifted in chakra control. So my jonin leader directed me to learn from a senior medical nin about becoming one. Ainz read about the concept of chakra control beforehand but didn't realize how significant it could be to a ninja's ability to learn certain jutsu. Unlike mana, which required no level of control over it, the people here had to train their control, and not everyone was gifted in it. So the medical nin job class had a higher level chakra control requirement. There wasn't anything that Ainz could do to help ease that requirement, but there were methods to heal with spells from items or summons that he had available. Ainz asked, what's the strongest healing jutsu you've seen? The medical nin leader showed me the mystical palm technique, that's an A-rank jutsu. The genin girl answered. Oh, a ranked jutsu. That's the rank below the highest grade. But if the medical nin leader knew an A-rank jutsu, wouldn't that make him quite strong? Well, healers aren't supposed to be frontliners, but healing spells did damage to the undead, so it would be worth some caution around medical nin. And what about you? She grinned, I just learned the healing technique, it's basic, only D rank, but I'm happy about it. Oh, congratulations then, healers are a very important member for a PAR team, he quickly corrected his use of terms at the end. If she learned a basic healing jutsu and it's a D rank, it might be similar to the low-tier spell, like Cure Wounds, or Middle Cure Wounds. It was difficult to determine and compare jutsu ranks to tier spell levels. Thanks. I'm sure to become a great medical nin of Nadeshiko. She proclaimed. Quite a loyal genin, but she was conditioned to be. There was little separation of civilian and military education, both occurring in the same facility. Of course, as a genin, Sakiko likely didn't know the limits of actual medical nin yet. As a celebratory gift, let's see, he reached into his robe again, thinking about what type of item would benefit the young Kunoichi. Ah, here. Ainz pulled out a necklace with 3 emerald-hued gems attached to a golden chain. A necklace. She said, confused. This isn't a normal necklace, this is that necklace of crystal healing. You see, it has a special little effect. Why not try using your healing technique jutsu? He said, putting the necklace over the girl's head, letting it rest on her neck. She proceeded to use 3 hand seals, then place one hand over the other as a bright glowing ball of green energy appeared. It looked similar to a touch spell. Unsurprising, much lower healing spells required short or melee range. It's way brighter, she commented. So it's not normally bright. So it must be working. Necklace of crystal healing improves your healing effectiveness when it's worn, Ainz explained. It actually increased the healing power of spells by a value of 15. The item also had another effect besides increased healing empowerment. It provided a self-regeneration effect to non-undead wearers, though it was minuscule. There had been many gimmick builds trying to find ways to exploit health regeneration, and although certain races such as trolls could exploit it better, there hadn't been many players who stuck with it. Ainz recalled a previous thought about handing out items and equipment, and while he couldn't outfit everyone in Nadeshiko village, that didn't mean he couldn't give any equipment whatsoever. Especially items that he couldn't use himself. Although it would hurt the collector inside, as long as it wasn't the last of that item in his inventory, no harm was done. He should also restrict it to low-level items, that way he can control the power balance a bit. He felt that his friends would approve. Can I keep this? Isn't this really valuable? Sakiko questioned in alarm. Valuable? Well, with any other method to obtain more, then yes it is. But for Ainz, he didn't feel like the item, in particular, was valuable. It was just a lobby drop item. Yamaiko had an entire divine grade set of items for her healing build and even used some healer wands. Wait, did wands work for the people here? He had quite the quantity of wands. They didn't require mana to use, unlike some items, thought for another time. Yes, keep it. I can't use medical ninjutsu, so it's useless to me, he admitted truthfully, but as the genin explained before, it wasn't uncommon. He just realized his break time is probably almost up by now and he never managed to step foot on Academy Hill. So many distractions, all interesting. He hoped Shizuka would give him some vacation days. He'd like to indulge in the village's various facilities and shops sometime. Later at night, Ainz Uelgaon had been called upon by Shizuka to join her outside the entrance of Nadeshiko village. It wasn't a social call, rather, an obligation to defend the village as the co-leader and husband. Not 2 days had passed and already he was fighting in defense of his workplace. What sort of world was this that an entire ninja village would be threatened so quickly? He still barely knew how chakra and jutsu worked. There wasn't much information to go on here. His panic was suppressed back down to a calm demeanor. No, this was just coincidental. The information that Nadeshiko village's culture states its Kanoiki must marry and welcome a man into the village would bring it unsavory individuals wishing to take advantage of that fact. Shizuka, as the leader of the village, would be a primary target. His presence here announced the fact that the position with Shizuka was already taken. Well, he'll first confirm. Shizuka, he spoke his would-be wife's name, watching her as she was double-checking her equipment. Yes, Ainz. She replied to him while doing her checks. It is unusual that a group would threaten Nadeshiko unless it was a foreign village or notable rogue ninja, Ainz began. What is the situation that both leaders must be called handle it? It's a strange case, not something that's happened before for me, but a little while ago I got a report that a new form of wildlife appeared and attacked patrolling Kanoiki, she explained. Oh, wait, wasn't that? Shizuka continued, it's a small pack of what look like wolves, but an unnatural light glows off their fur. The returning Chunin managed to escape. I believe these may be summons by an enemy ninja trying to gain information. It really was that moonlight wolves, at least he got confirmation that ninja summons exist though, a useful tidbit of information. Are you sure this pack didn't wander in and claim territory? Ainz said, attempting to dissuade Shizuka. Wolves aren't naturally found in the land of water, and they don't glow, Shizuka finished and looked straight at Ainz's mask. Yikes, she's taking this seriously. Still, if they're summons, why couldn't the Chunin defeat them? He asked curiously. They tried and failed, the wolves outsped them, she answered. Really? Sure, they were quite quick for level 20 summons, but not that strong. Perhaps he overestimated ninja, or maybe. Wait. He should take a more real-world approach to how things work. A level 1 player avatar had the same potential as any other level 1 player, but that was with game balance. But a world of reality wouldn't take that into consideration. There might be Chunin stronger or weaker than other Chunin, or perhaps even stronger than Jonin, or weaker than some Genin. Did a ninja's rank designate their power and strength, or was it other factors taken into consideration? The bingo book seemed a more accurate danger estimate, but a rank in the village might be more based on experience than level. Ainz nodded to himself, understanding more about this ninja world. Now, should he admit to summoning those wolves? He'd rather not replace them, and he wanted to keep a guard for the planted seed. But he had caused this incident in the first place. Then let's head out, Shizuka said. Just admit it already, Satoru, you messed up. His emotions were suppressed once again. Hold it, can you let me handle this? I have a jutsu that can tame them if they're not an enemy summons, he said, feeling for his link with the moonlight wolves, which was easily felt. She looked curiously at him, but agreed, all right, to be honest, I don't exactly like fighting animals, her seriousness waned. Not because they look like dogs. Ainz commented. Well, maybe the two, she looked away with a bit of an embarrassment. He chuckled a bit, do not worry, I have a feeling they are no threat to Nadeshiko. Yeah, right, a feeling, ugh, what was he thinking, doing that in the afternoon? After a small trek, Ainz and Shizuka arrived at the riverside where the moonlight wolves, remaining laying around the place where they were told to guard. Shizuka hid in the bush, a hand reached into her weapon pouch, ready to throw bladed weaponry at a moment's notice. Ainz, on the other hand, approached the wolves without any caution, because he knew otherwise. He did a flamboyant hand movement and cast triplet silent magic, lesser luck, which cast silently 3 times that lesser luck buff spell, making all 3 wolves glow with a special effect while he shouted, wildlife tame canine jutsu. Of course, no such jutsu existed as far as Ainz knew, it was merely for show. He made a mental command to them to cease all orders and remain passive. He turned to Shizuka, motioning her to approach. She left her hiding spot, Is that it? They're tame. Tamed, not domesticated, he made sure to clarify. They're passive to everything right now, but won't be forever. I can make an imprint not to attack anything with Nadeshiko village's symbol. The symbol of Nadeshiko village was a circle of 5 black petals that reached inward before stopping at a white star in the center of the circle. Basically, a flower with a star inside it. Can they help defend the village? She asked. I can make them defend people with the symbol, he replied. He had complete control over the summons, but designating the defense of the village would be troublesome to distinguish between Kunoichi, citizens, and friendly foreigners without some sort of identification. Do that then, Shizuka seemed pleased. Maybe she was happy with the fact they had wolves in service of the village. Ainz didn't know, but he did admit moonlight wolves did look kinda cool. He made an exaggerated hand motion. Done, Ainz spoke to the Kunoichi. He repeated his old order but added the key factor to treat those with Nadeshiko's symbol with impassiveness, but defend them if in the same proximity from hostiles. With Shizuka's presence, the moonlight wolves would be able to identify the symbol from her headband. All in all, he managed to fix his mistake. He hoped it was just this one time. The Overlord of Nadeshiko. Chapter 6. Shizuka rubbed her forehead with her left hand, while her right continued answering sheets and approving or rejecting paperwork requiring the village leader's permission or opinion. It was another busy day, looking more and more like another day stuck in the office, and this time without the excuse to leave and find a husband. Admittedly, she used that as a means to escape the drool of paperwork, but Ainz had seen the end of that. Her mind wandered, thinking about the fact that tomorrow the ceremonial marriage would occur and she'd be married to Ainz Gaon. She disliked the fact of a marriage, especially not long after her previous lover's death, but even she was not excused from the cultural laws. There were a few clauses that would prevent that law from occurring. One was that the male victor wasn't an enemy of Nadeshiko village. Also, the man cannot be considered a B rank or above target in the Land of Water's bingo book. Lastly, the cultural law does not apply during missions unrelated to it. That last clause was to prevent complications in enemy ninja trying to exploit Nadeshiko's laws during a Kunoichi's mission. When Ainz had found Shizuka, she hadn't been on a mission, rather in search of opponents to defeat and increase her strength to avoid marriage in the first place. That turned out well. Regardless, this was her fate. To marry Ainz Gaon, a ninja that continued to surprise her with both his power and intellect, he managed to tame those Chunin-level wolves with a wave with a jutsu that required no hand seals. In fact, none of his ninjutsu requires the formation of seals so far, an oddity that intrigued her. The ceremony wasn't anything complex. Shizuka had to tell Ainz what to do beforehand. There was a tradition in it. A knock on the door drew her thoughts. Come in, Shizuka said, looking up from the paperwork towards the door across from her desk. The door opened, revealing her longtime friend and attendant, Tokiwa. Lady Shizuka, Tokiwa spoke formally while Shizuka was in the office. She carried a small blue booklet. The graduation of this year's genin, she explained as she placed it down on the desk. Shizuka picked it up, opening it, revealing each page dedicated to at least 2 potential genin per page. As the leader of Nadeshiko village, Shizuka had the right to form specific teams of genin from the list of graduates taking the Kunoichi exam. Even Ainz did not have this right. Even if he held some militant control now, certain things were still outside his positional power. A team of Kunoichi in Nadeshiko village had 3 members. That was 2 genin for 1 Chunin leader. The Chunin can be a jonin as well, but the village lacked Kunoichi in the rank to fill in for all teams. So Jonin leaders were reserved for the only genin with great potential. It wasn't a fair system, but in this ninja world sacrifices had to be made to secure the future of the village's prosperity. Of course, a few teams of 4 in Nadeshiko did exist, but that was for the odd occasions. Noteworthy genin this year. She had an inkling of an idea already, familiar with the village as a native resident. Most genin did not display any particular talents, and bloodline limits within Nadeshiko were nearly non-existent, especially given the Mist Village's recent purge 4 years back of bloodline limit holders in the Land of Water. Luckily, Nadeshiko village was far away enough from the village hidden in the mist to avoid most problems caused by the village's brutal practices. It was no surprise that Nadeshiko village had adopted an approach more like the Land of Fire's Leaf village. Nowadays, the 5th Mizukage had tried to strengthen diplomatic ties with Nadeshiko village, but the times of the Bloody Mist had kept Shizuka wary, preferring to keep the Mist village at arm's length, even if it might prove detrimental in an economical sense. It's quite an average year again, Tokiwa answered. A few exceeding in particular talents over others, but nothing eye-catchingly unique, she trailed off, which was unlike her attendant. Tokiwa? Shizuka asked. There's one girl, Tokiwa said, she's unlike the others, first generation, the father died from illness while the mother gets by with embroidery. She's shown to display a high level of intellect, maturity, and an unusually high chakra pool for our village. This interested her, a whirlpool descendant, perhaps. Shizuka questioned. Nadeshiko village's peninsula was right below the ruins of the Whirlpool village, whose members had rumors to have high chakra reserves and increased endurance. Although Shizuka knew most of the village by face, that didn't mean she was aware of everybody on a personal level. Tokiwa paused for a moment, likely trying to remember information about that particular group, then replied, "No, she doesn't have red hair and no special chakra qualities." Odd, but with large chakra reserves, she'll fit well with a ninjutsu specialist. Shizuka flipped through the pages to look for the girl, paying attention to descriptive notes and finding a matching one. Shizuka blinked, taking a good look at the aforementioned genin's picture. She must get her looks from her father. Any particular troubles? Her large reserves give her chakra control problems, and has issues with working alongside with others of the same age, preferring more experienced Kunoichi. Shizuka thought for a bit. Then I'll make her fill in a spot with older members, she said, writing down the assigned group on the genin's profile. Strange name. The village leader remarked. I'm sure Kluke can handle her when she returns. The profile image was of a petite young girl with blonde hair and ice-cold blue eyes. In just one more day, Suzuki Satoru, known as Ainz shall be married to a woman he still barely knew. He could already feel the clapping of hands from Perencino for netting himself a wife, and the scolding words from his sister Bukubaku Chigama for forcing a girl to marry due to politics. There were also various other opinions from the other supreme beings he could imagine, positive and negative feedback that Satoru couldn't help but almost hide in shame, embarrassment, and mentally proclaim that it wasn't his fault. His emotional suppressor activated. The sudden return to cold calculation he'd taken to calling the effect emotional suppression, a byproduct of what he assumed was due to this racial status as an undead. It only activated when his emotions reached a certain level. It wouldn't interrupt a chuckle, but it would stop his laughter after a brief moment. The same could be said for the other end. If he got angry, would it also take away the rage after a fleeting moment? At least it didn't outright remove his emotions. just repressed them into a manageable state. A mercy and something he was thankful for. The feelings he felt from his memories of Ainz were precious to him. He didn't want those emotions to vanish. It was handy in keeping his cool. He surely needed it after last night's mistake. Who knew that simple level 20 summons could cause a ruckus? There was something that he was missing concerning ninja. He needed some sort of test to determine the strength of this chakra. It seemed the Chunin couldn't defeat level 20 summons, but as Ainz theorized the night before, it could rather be a case-by-case basis. A ninja's militant rank such as Genin, Chunin, or Jonin did not correlate to some sort of advanced job class, but just a position. That's not to say it was wholly inaccurate. It wasn't incorrect to say that a Jonin would likely beat a Genin. I still have no idea how powerful anything is, Ainz sighed. Despite not being capable of breathing, that didn't stop his voice from mimicking it. Maybe I should ask Shizuka for a rematch. Or have a training session with another Kunoichi. Order them to showcase their jutsu. Would that be alright? Or an abuse of power? He wondered to himself, pacing around his room. And what about the management of Nadeshiko village? It wasn't a company, though he treated its upper management similar to one. His experience as a salaryman can only help in so many ways on the economics side, while his experience as a guildmaster and Parker helped on the military side, but neither could help in managing the civilian populace. Thankfully, it wasn't expected of him to manage everything. Shizuka held a lot of the responsibilities, and the Elder Council acted as advisors, but they also acted like investors. Investors as advisors did not generally end well, but they weren't strictly identical to those greed-ruled men of 2138, they did not hold the same life-controlling power that the megacorps held. These were elderly people, an age group that Satoru had never seen before in his old world, though maybe he encountered one or two in YGGDRASIL, it was hard to recall. Let's focus on more present situations, the Overlord in disguise said. The geological survey hasn't returned yet, might be another day or two before that happens, it is a decently sized region after all. The marriage ceremony, I'll need to learn more about it from Shizuka first. I still need to find more information about Chakra, the books in the library just don't have anything advanced on the topic. That might be because Nadeshiko village didn't have a majorly stocked library. Such information might be in the Great Five Ninja villages, but not here. He could send a Kunoichi team to the village hidden in the mist to purchase the information, but such knowledge could also be restricted. It is a military asset to hide knowledge of deeper chakra understanding. There would have to be an exchange of equal goods. Now that he thought about it, Nadeshiko village's ties with the village hidden in the mist had been loose. If Ainz could form a deeper bond between the two companies' villages, it might be worthwhile economically and politically. On the other end, he could cut ties with the Mist village and pursue the Leaf village, as Nadeshiko village bordered the Land of Fire. But that was a huge risk and would likely create hostilities with the Mist village for cooperating with a rival. So many factors to take into account, Ainz said, taking a moment to look out the window and over half the village, his gaze lingering on the lowest hilltop. It was just so undefended, and that made Ainz anxious. The defense of the Great Tomb of Nazarick was an absolute marvel in YGGDRASIL, a fortified guild that managed to successfully defend itself from an alliance of players. There wasn't a single floor that didn't have its defenders, and although the 9th floor of Nazarick could be considered not as defended, it was guarded by 8 floors before it. The lowest hilltop of Nadeshiko village would be the entrance point for invaders, so it would be the equivalent of Nazarik's first to third floors in terms of importance. And it was nearly utterly defenseless, save for patrolling Kunoichi and residential fighters. I need to improve Nadeshiko's defenses. We can use the earth from the quarry to erect walls around the lowest hilltop. He'd also need to make it unscalable. As he witnessed in the past few days, Chakra ninja can walk and run up surfaces. The walls were to dissuade armies of non-ninja combatants but could also serve as a front to block outside enemy jutsu. This way, any enemy ninja had to first scale the wall before they can use a jutsu to attack population centers, and that was after scaling the natural elevation of the hilltop. That was the benefit of Nadeshiko village's natural geography. It forced opponents to approach and scale the hills. Of course, this was negligible for any ninja with a jutsu capable of flight, but recalling those rogue ninja, it was apparently a rarity that only a cage of the stone village could do. Ainz left his room and started making his way to the main hall. In particular, he wished to discuss with Shizuka about numerous topics. He wasn't making any headway by his own thoughts and what little he continued to glean from the library. Sure, his nights were spent reading, but the available information didn't help when it concerned ninja, though management skills certainly did improve. Even though he was a max level 100 character, that didn't mean he couldn't continue to grow. The depths of knowledge held no limit. He could still learn how to manage or even command people. Though, when it came to combat, he still wouldn't gain any more experience points past the 90% mark. He hadn't certainly gained any when killing those rogue ninja. He passed by a few Kunoichi, who were starting to become a little familiar with his presence in the village, though the civilians remained a bit wary of him. It didn't take long to enter the main hall and approach the leader's office. The proximity between it and Ainz's living quarters was short. The Overlord knocked on the door then entered. He spotted Tokiwa first, the attendant doing her job in keeping the village leader's schedule on time, while Shizuka continued to flip through sheet after sheet of paperwork. He could visibly see the tired expression on her face, even when her focus remained constant on the work at hand. After a minute, she finally spent a few seconds looking up and noticing his presence. "Ainz, did you need something?" It was a strictly professional question, not the more casual demeanor in the little free time they had spoken. "Do you have a report on the geological survey mission?" he asked, wondering if the Kunoichi team on the mission had sent anything back. Shizuka opened the drawer on the right-hand side and started browsing through the numerous folders, before pulling one out and placing it forward on the desk. Ainz approached and took it, opening the folder to reveal only 2 reports. It was a geological survey, so occasional reports were expected, and about 2 days had passed since they'd accepted the mission. Ainz read through it. The area was quite larger than expected. It would take significantly longer to thoroughly examine the region's natural resources. The Jonin leader, Kluke, had requested an additional team for a broader search, but the request hadn't been approved by Shizuka. "Why didn't you approve it?" "I don't have any other teams capable of taking a B-ranked mission, a matter of logistics," Shizuka replied. Tokiwa further clarified, "was stretched thin on Jonin, and most Chunin are already on missions." "I see," Ainz trailed off, his mind racing for a possible solution. His gaze settled on a folder that had the title of Genin graduation list. Did that mean a new generation of Kunoichi just graduated? So that meant they had extra forces to use. How about Genin? Shizuka raised an eyebrow. "I have a few experienced Genin but..." Send them and fill in empty spots with graduates, Ainz said. Tokiwa looked shocked, then angrily shouted, the graduates. Complete greenhorns. They're expected to finish D ranks, let alone a B rank mission. That's like a suicide mission for them. Yikes. He didn't expect such anger. His emotional suppression kept him level-headed. Tokiwa. Shizuka shouted with authority. The woman calmed down immediately. My apologies, Lady Shizuka. I understand your anger, but perhaps Ainz has some thoughts as to why he would suggest this, Shizuka said. Then looking back at him, Tokiwa's point holds truth. Ainz, a vast majority of Academy graduates only know E-rank jutsu, they would not survive an encounter with enemy ninja. The Region 1 St. Luke's team is closer to Nadeshiko than any other ninja villages, Ainz began to explain. The only reason behind its high rank is due to the urgency in claiming natural resources to solve Nadeshiko's economic situation. The potential danger level is C rank at worst, D rank at best, he finished, hoping that they would see reason. Furthermore, I gifted experimental jutsu scrolls that would grant them invisibility when used. I read about that. Honestly, such items are astonishing to even exist, Shizuka commented. They are not replenishable, but I needed success, he said. Send a genin team to aid in the survey, I'll provide them with scrolls, and if you still feel uncomfortable, I can also send one of the wolves from last night to aid them. They act similar to summons while under my control. Shizuka narrowed her eyes, staring directly at Ainz. Honestly, it was a bit intimidating. Keep the wolf here, Shizuka answered. I'll send a genin team lead by an experienced one. Lady Shizuka. Tokiwa wanted to interject. The decision is made under the authority of a village leader. Shizuka spoke. Thank you, Shizuka. Do not worry, I promise under the name of Ainz Ulgaun that if anything were to happen I will make post-haste to aid them personally, he firmly spoke, ideally thinking that perhaps he should send a stealth-type summon with the genin team, or a scroll with message. He couldn't summon a shadow demon without Nazarick. Well, he could, but it would first require summoning higher level demons to summon it, such as using the 10th tier spell, Armageddon Evil. However, he might be able to use a similar summon through his skill, create low tier undead to make a wraith. But, like all summons, it would have a duration, and he can't apply metamagic to skills. In the experiment with the Moonlight Wolves, which had already far surpassed their original summoning duration, his summons would at the least last 12 hours, perhaps with extend metamagic, he could delay their timer further. Of course, Moonlight Wolves were also summoned by the staff of Ainz Ulgaun, and not Ainz himself. The increased duration might be attributed to only items and not players. Those wolves were still around, but for how much longer? Wait, what about both? Why stick with either a summons or scroll when he could just do both? Assuring, at least I can send Kluke's new genin earlier than expected, Shizuka reasoned and began making a small mission scroll. Ainz dug into his inventory and pulled forth a few message and invisibility. Of all the scrolls he had, message was a bit lacking in quantity. All magic casters had the 3rd tier spell, so having a scroll of it would be redundant for him, only useful for players without the spell, which is why he had a few of them for his friends without magic caster builds. So why didn't Ainz give message scrolls to Kluke's team earlier? He forgot, simple as that. To be fair, his mind was distracted by a lot of things. Hand these over to them, Ainz said. The usage is simple, Toss it lightly into the air and speak the spell name, in this case, invisibility, and message. He said, pointing to each group of scrolls. Message is a communication jutsu I invented, but I can't seem to create a hand seal variant. Tokiwa spoke up, no hand seal variant. Wait, does that mean you know advanced sealing techniques? These are created with seals. Sealing techniques. That's a new one. Was it a type of crafting job class for Chakra Ninja? Of a sort, he answered, not denying anything. Shizuka nodded. That explains some things, she answered. What does that mean? She turned to Tokiwa. I have selected the candidates. Tokiwa, please collect them and assign them to the mission. The village leader handed both the magic scrolls and the mission scroll to Tokiwa, who, although curious about Ainz, proceeded to leave the office to complete the order given. Another thing, Shizuka, Ainz began once again. It concerns the marriage ceremony. Right, she trailed off with a more feeble voice now that Tokiwa left. I should explain what you are expected to do. Please do. The Overlord of Nadeshiko. Chapter 7. Suzuki Satoru knew today would be the ceremonial marriage between Ainz Uelgaon and Shizuka, only 4 days after he arrived in this ninja-dominated world, and he'd be married to a woman he still barely knew. After this ceremony, Satoru resolved to learn more about his new wife. It didn't feel comfortable to be married without some sort of familiar relationship besides co-workers. And he wasn't aiming to divorce, not that it was possible as Nadeshiko village outlawed divorce. Yesterday, he and Shizuka had discussed the details of the ceremony, and later at night, Ainz dived into the book of Nadeshiko laws. A complicated mess which, if Ainz hadn't the mental fortitude and experience to navigate, would have flown completely out of mind. YGGDRASIL had some complications in it that rivaled Nadeshiko's lawbook, and that was nothing compared to the cesspool that was Japan's megacorporate favored laws. Fortunately, his current apparel was deemed suitable enough, so Ainz didn't have to switch equipment. However, Ainz was expected to reveal his face for a lengthy period. This would be tricky, but not impossible. It would require some different illusion spells coupled with perhaps an item or two. If anything were to dispel the illusions, he would be doomed to reveal his undead nature. Ainz wouldn't be the suspicious individual on this occasion. It was, after all, a celebratory event for him and Shizuka. Any Kanoiki not attending the event due to missions or necessary duties would instead be patrolling and guarding around the ceremony location. He understood the reason behind this protection. A publicized event like this could be a prime moment to assassinate someone. The ceremony didn't take place inside the village itself. Rather, there was a shrine at a ground elevation close by Nadeshiko in a clearing. It was typically used for religious purposes, but marriages occurred there as well. Nearby the shrine, tents and stalls had propped up over the last 2 days after the public announcement of Shizuka's betrothed status. After the ceremony, this is where celebrations would occur, almost like a holiday festival in YGGDRASIL, which was inspired by older festivals before the earth went to shit. It would be times like that when he wished his undead body would allow him to taste something. Some luxuries of life he would never get to experience. Still, he'll be satisfied by the scents and sights. But as for right now, he was busy searching through the rings in his inventory. Of course, he'll need a wedding ring, both for himself and Shizuka. But Ainz already had all 10 fingers equipped with various rings, one which was the ring of Ainz also remained the only ring without any tangible benefits. But the ring of Ainz is something he wouldn't give Shizuka. It would signify membership into the guild Ainz, and although she would be his wife, he didn't view her worthy or abiding by the guild's rules to join. So it was off the table. He thought about giving her Ring of Mastery wand, a ring that he himself had equipped. It allowed the wielder to use any type of wand regardless of arcane or divine wand type. The only downside is that it expends more mana to use, and since chakra seemed to not be equivalent to mana, Shizuka wouldn't be able to use it. Why was he thinking of gifting her a ring from Yggdrasil? Shizuka was important. Not in the way that Ainz cared for her emotionally, but from a purely logical perspective. And since Shizuka would be directly connected to him, it would be wise to present her a ring with a tangible benefit. What about divination protection or mental resistance? With protection against divination, it would prevent enemies from trying to spy on her using divination spells. That was always a crucial measure to safeguard information from opposing players. However, Ainz was unaware if jutsu with divination capability existed. A safer bet would be mental resistance. It was more straightforward and likely to work in protecting Shizuka from genjutsu. While not granting her complete immunity, lower-ranked genjutsu might be resisted and trick genjutsu specialists into believing Shizuka would be an ineffective target for genjutsu. Ainz nodded. Mental resistance would work for the wedding ring's effect. He had few of them, even if they held no tangible benefit for an undead, most had an additional benefit. He picked one that would fit the best for a ninja job class. As for Ainz, he would fake wearing the same ring with an illusion on his hand. He did have to take his gauntlet off for that brief moment after all. Just needed to avoid direct physical contact. Shizuka didn't actually wish to kiss him, given her displeasure of the rule that led to this. So the plan was simple: remove his mask, face still covered by his illusion, and use the mask to cover the act of the kiss. Perencino said that it was romantic in his eroges, maybe it would work here. What am I doing? I'm taking advice from Perencino for romanticism, Ainz muttered to himself, facepalming at the lunacy of it all. I just have to get through this one event, just this one, then never again. Why was this so much harder than doing the village paperwork? His emotions regressed to a manageable state. I can do this, complete the ceremony then return to work, no need to do the post-ceremony bedroom, Ainz said aloud. An electronic beeping sound echoed from a watch on his arm, which he had set earlier. Big Brother Momonga. The timer you set is up. Thanks for the reminder, Bukubakuchigama, he replied as he unequipped the nostalgic item and stored it back into his inventory. He stood up, mentally prepared, and walked out the door. As he left the building, he suddenly felt the connection between him and the Moonlight Wolves dissipate. But it wasn't caused by the death of them, rather, he knew the reason behind it. So, around 48 hours they lasted, a record time. Ainz felt pleased by this, an excitement of progress. His summons would last longer in this world than in Yggdrasil. Or at least, those summoned by the staff of Ainz. He wondered how long his undead skills creations would last. Shortly after Shizuka finished explaining about the ceremony yesterday, Ainz retreated to his private quarters and used his skill, Create Low-Tier Undead, to make a wraith. He ordered it to stealthily follow and protect the Genin team with the magic scrolls, which it followed right after the team had left Nadeshiko. He hoped no complications would occur, but just in case any Kunoichi from Nadeshiko discovered that wraith, and attacked it, it was ordered to let them kill it. Lord Ainz, Tokiwa greeted him outside. Tokiwa, I assume you'll be my escort? Ainz questioned. Yes, I'll escort you through Nadeshiko down to its entrance. Then you'll follow down the path by yourself, Tokiwa replied. Lead the way, Ainz motioned his hand for her to proceed. They continued walking in silence for a bit, civilians absent of the day-to-day activities, likely present at the ceremony location. Only the subtle hidden movements of other escorting Kunoichi betrayed any hint of a private walk. Tokiwa suddenly started speaking. I'm going to be brutally honest, Lord Ainz, Shizuka doesn't like this marriage. I know, we've spoken about it, Ainz admitted. I'm her friend, I support her wishes and approved of her previous relationship full-heartedly. I tried to keep it a secret, but the cat got out of the bag soon enough, she continued. He noticed her fists clenching. And I did nothing to help her in that endeavor. The circumstances that led to the incident were against Shizuka. The odds of changing such a deeply embedded law were low and would take years to accomplish, he said. Even if you did help her, the Elder Council held too much weight for an attendant to change anything. That doesn't excuse my lack of actions, Tokiwa stated. No, it does not, Ainz acknowledged. But as you said, you supported her desire. Shizuka still keeps you by her side, when she could have easily replaced you. I say that means she still considers you a friend. Even as a member after member left YGGDRASIL, Suzuki Satoru still considered them his friends. He never replaced their positions and refused to sell their equipment or items. If at any point they'd return, he'll welcome them with open arms. He longed for that moment, clinging on to a small hope that somewhere in this world, that sometime in the future, he will find them. She paused in her walk for a moment, remaining in silent reflection, then said, Sorry, I guess I needed help understanding that, thanks. Ainz raised his hand. It's all right, helping someone is common sense. Isn't that right, touch me? Shizuka approached the shrine and began her ceremonial prayer, a tradition passed down for each village leader's marriage. In all honesty, Shizuka wasn't praying, just thinking to herself while kneeling in position with hands clasped together. How could Shizuka pray when this wasn't what she wanted? To marry a man that wasn't her true love, following a barbaric law, and above all else, connecting herself to the terrifying individual known as Ainz Gaon. He was terrifying, but not horrifying. He was scary in the way of his intellect and charisma. But, by some mercy, he seemed to genuinely want to help. His ideas, while outside the box, might have merit. Shizuka wasn't blind to Nadeshiko village's problems. Disregarding the cultural laws, the village wasn't in a stable economic position. Ainz knew that too, and that is why he started searching for ways to improve it. The shrine is where they would marry. She would pray at the shrine for a few minutes before the groom, Ainz, arrived down a long road, both sides crowded with villagers. They would cheer, congratulate, and throw flowers in approval. The elder council stood around the shrine, each giving their blessings to the husband before Shizuka would stand and face him. Afterward, Ainz would show a feat of strength, likely a jutsu. Shizuka would follow suit. Then, the rings that the husband provided would be placed on her finger and his own, with a kiss confirming the marriage. Only after that, would the festivals begin. She could hear the cheers already, the throwing of flower bouquets. Ainz approached the shrine. His steps were heavy on the stone stairs. He stopped and each elder began their spiel about the duties and love that this mockery of a real marriage would be. Shizuka stood up and turned, her sight taking in the form of her husband. He looked intimidating, even as he wore the same clothing as the past few days. It didn't lose any of its regality or shine. As if dirt and stains could not touch the outfit, too lowly to consider such an act. My husband, Shizuka forced the words out. Ainz gown. My wife, he replied, Shizuka. The Elder of War began the announcement. This day, our village leader shall marry the only man to defeat her. As a tradition in Nadeshiko village, let the husband showcase his power with an introduction, to represent his ability to defend his newfound family that is the village. Ainz turned to face the ground. His voice seemed to bolster itself, speaking loud and clear. People of Nadeshiko village, I am Ainz gown. He began. Heed my words, so long as I remain, this village will remain protected under my name. All its citizens, its Kunoiki, and future immigrants shall have my support. His voice switched its tone, taking a more humble approach. I will be honest with you, Nadeshiko village is a minor footnote compared to the 5 great ninja nations. He then returned to a loud statement. But I aim to change that fact. Under Shizuka and I, we will guide the village to prosperity matching or exceeding them. Her citizens, her Kunoiki, those that Shizuka had to lead, all cheered and shouted in response to his speech. He had them wrapped around his finger. Shizuka listened more closely. Ainz was speaking under his breath, a whisper that none could hear but her. What should I use? Don't want to use my strongest, maybe 10th tier. Something not destructive, that could work, and it could be used as a defensive location. Ainz gown took a glance around and found a location not occupied by the crowd. He raised his hand, create fortress. Jutsu. It sounded like he added that last word as an afterthought. Again, without hand seals, but this time it was occupied by various circles that appeared in front of his hand, covered in some sort of script unfamiliar with Shizuka. But, not a moment later, a loud rumbling echoed through the area, and the location that Ainz had aimed at appeared a large, 30-meter-tall fortification standing proudly against the sky. If it were an Earth-style jutsu, this type of building would be quite simple in design, but Ainz had created an impossibility for all Kunoiki in Nadeshiko. It wasn't just pure earth. This mighty tower had massive double doors, sturdy looking enough to withstand a siege. Its walls were studded with numerous spikes to prevent ninja from easily scaling it, and 4 demonic statues adorned the corners of its peak. Its design felt oppressive as it was impressive. The material the tower was created was a sturdy, carved rock with a white gleam. It wasn't an Earth-style jutsu, the materials didn't match with it, the design was too elaborate. That is why the Kunoikas were silent, from the genin to the jonin, and even Shizuka herself. Many civilians were also astounded, as more than half of them were familiar with Chakra due to the Academy's fusion of civilian and ninja education. This caused the entire crowd to look in complete astonishment, utterly silent. Ainz coughed into his hand, Shizuka. That knocked her out of her stupor. Right. Shizuka began running through the various hand seals, molding her chakra to begin her strongest jutsu: rat, snake, horse, dog. Wind style, vacuum blast. She took a deep breath and spins while exhaling towards the sky. Compressed air was released as a solitary blade of wind, cutting apart a few nearby trees that were near and tall enough for her directed jutsu to hit. With this, the crowd seemed to return to a normal response, but their cheers were louder than before, excited by interesting, an area of effect wind element ninjutsu, Ainz commented. Curious as to its rank. Once Shizuka finished her jutsu, she replied to Ainz in a lowered tone. It's B rank. So that's a B rank. He seemed satisfied with the answer, though it only confused her by his meaning. He reached into his robe and pulled out a small box, which Shizuka identified must be holding the wedding ring inside. He opened it, revealing a beautiful piece of jewelry that must have costed a fortune to make. Ainz, that's Shizuka attempted to reject it. Do not worry, it is more than it appears, Ainz reassured her, though he must have misunderstood her intention. She sighed and raised her arm, revealing her bare hand. Ainz slipped on the ring. Something happened. It was some sort of feeling that was hard to describe. But the moment the ring slipped on her finger, a feeling of safety washed over her thoughts and remained like a barrier between her mind and outside influences. What is this ring? Shizuka questioned in shock. A wedding ring, he answered while bringing out another, taking off one of his gloves to reveal his firm bare hand, then slipping it on himself for many to see, then placing the glove back on. Apologies, I prefer to keep my gloves on for personal reasons while in public. Ainz and Shizuka moved closer to the shrine. This was because they wanted the shrine to cover a direction, and not let the elders have full view. It was time to end this ceremony. He removed his mask, revealing his face again, then leaned forward. She also leaned forward towards his face, but could not feel his breath. Was he holding it? Regardless, Ainz used his mask to cover both his and Shizuka's close faces, leaned a little closer, and they both stayed like this for a long couple of seconds in a fake kissing act. Then, he retreated, as did she, and Ainz placed the mask back on. With that, Shizuka was now married to Ainz Gown. The village of Nadeshiko cheered louder than ever as the festivities began. Meanwhile, in a region not far from Nadeshiko village, a team of 4 genin Kunoichi arrived at the designation location for their mission. It was a large forested area with high humidity and a massive lake at its center. A heavy fog covered the water's surface. The experienced genin led the team towards a small encampment near the lake's edge, where the previous team lead by the Jonin, Kluke, awaited them. Jonin Kluke greeted them warmly. I'm pleased to receive some additional Kunoichi. Do not worry, there hasn't been any sort of danger in the region. The experienced genin, Yuriku, presented a scroll. Jonin Kluke, Lady Shizuka wants you to read this. Kluke raised an eyebrow, then opened the scroll, quickly reading through it, before her eyes trailed over the 4 genins. She burned the scroll, then directed her attention towards one of the graduates, a petite blonde girl that was shorter than her temporary companions, her outfit a dull gray and green hues for camouflage, headband tied to her upper arm, and her weapon pouch had an additional string to it, preventing it from falling out from a stray kunai. It was a very militant approach to uniform, completely unlike her fellows which boasted the more typical expressive clothing and colors. You are my team's newest member. Kluke questioned, a little puzzled and curious as to what sort of individual a graduate could be to warrant placement on a team of Chunin and a Jonin. Introduce yourself. The young girl nodded, then replied, her voice sounded purposely more mature as if practiced to hide her young pitch. My name is Tanya, Mom. Tanya, welcome to my team, Kluke greeted.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like this video if you want some more what if video. Comment 3 hearts for more what if.